downloading my totally tubular game.
So, video game remakes. There have been a lot of video game remakes, especially recently. But hey, remakes make a whole lot of sense. You get to introduce a game to a totally new audience, you get to sometimes improve things from that original game, and oftentimes you get to create an even better experience. You also usually make the game more widely accessible, which is always going to be a good thing. Now, there have been so many video game remakes throughout gaming. We're talking tens, hundreds, dozens even of video game remakes, and not all of them get the spotlight. While plenty of them absolutely do, not all of them get the attention that they deserve. And so for today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you all 15 underrated video game remakes that are actually worth your time. Call them hidden gems, underappreciated, under the radar, underrated, under something, whatever you want to call them, it doesn't matter. These games didn't get enough love. And so here I am to sing these games' praises for a little bit. I'm also going to be looking at all different eras of gaming. Remakes aren't anything new to video games. Remakes have been around for quite some time, so don't expect to see like only remakes released in the 2020s. Don't expect to see like Resident Evil 3 on here or something like that. No, I'm actually doing a little bit of digging, and there might actually be a few games that you haven't heard of, or at least games you haven't thought about in quite some time. Either way, this list is in no particular order. These aren't reviews, this isn't a ranking. I'm just sharing my thoughts on some really awesome remakes, and hopefully somebody finds their next favorite here. But regardless of all of that, let's get to the games. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. I got the Patreon and the super thanks and memberships as well. Major shout out to all of my members. Seriously, thank you all so very much. So let's kick things off. So I thought I would kick things off with one of my absolute favorite remakes of all time, Serious Sam HD, which is actually a bit of an older remake, but it has since been re-released on more modern platforms. So Serious Sam HD is a remake of Serious Sam First and Second Encounter from the early 2000s, now brought to a newer version of the Serious engine, updated graphics, and some tweaks here and there. This is a very faithful remake that really recaptures everything that made First and Second Encounter as awesome as it is, and really just gives it a nice new shiny coat of paint. Now, I love First and Second Encounter. These are some of my favorite first-person shooters of all time, with Second Encounter in particular being arguably my favorite first-person shooter ever made. Like, I've come back to this game so many times, and it's always so much fun. Both of these games play pretty similar to each other. They just drop you into these rather large environments, and you just take out waves upon waves of enemies, but both of these games, especially Second Encounter, do a great job at mixing things up, keeping things varied, and just having some really solid pacing throughout. None of these levels feel similar to each other, and they're constantly introducing new weapons, enemies, weird little gimmicks and set pieces, etc. And it just makes for a really entertaining, enjoyable first-person shooter. The weapons feel really nice, all of them have their own uses, and I love how different each one is from each other. I also love the enemies. The enemies really have their own strategies. You'll determine which weapon is best for which enemy, and then it feels like the game tries its hardest to make all of these encounters feel as different as possible. Yeah, a fair amount of them do end up feeling the same, but the game certainly tries. When it comes to the actual remake element of this game, you know, the presentation, I think it's still a good looking game even nowadays. It has solid lighting, the environments are nice, and it's a pretty clear step up from the original games. The original games still look nice and are very playable nowadays, but if you're going to be playing Serious Sam First or Second Encounter, you're probably going to be playing this HD version. And all these years later, I feel like this HD version is still relatively underrated. So here's another forgotten remake with Mega Man Powered Up, released for the PSP in the mid-2000s. So this is a remake of the original Mega Man, the NES title, and it's honestly the definitive way to play this game, but it's never been re-released once. The only way to play it is still on the PSP, and that's a real shame. And you might go, wait, why is this the definitive way to play it? How is this better than the NES version? Well, not only does it obviously look better than the original game, but it actually adds a fair amount of content and extras here. First off, yes, the game does go for a completely different art style. It goes for a 3D chibi art style, and while it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, I think it actually really suits classic Mega Man, and I think it looks just fine here. The game also has some remastered, redone music, and it's some pretty good mixes is all I'll say. When it comes to the actual moment-to-moment gameplay, it obviously plays very similar to Mega Man 1, and if you don't know how Mega Man plays, well, I can't really help you out there. I'm about as useful as a health inspector at any TGI Fridays, i.e. I'm not going to be doing doing shit. It's Mega Man, you probably know how things are gonna play out. The game controls a lot better than the NES original, it feels a lot smoother, and it feels a bit more seamless. The original Mega Man only had 6 Robot Masters, this game has 8, it actually adds 2 new ones, Oil Man and Time Man, and I think these are decent enough additions. You can also play through the game a few different ways. You can play through it in a very classic style, where it is incredibly faithful to that original title, but there's also a new way to play through this game, which is by default the normal way actually, where the difficulty is actually toned down a little and you get to play as other characters. You aren't just playing as Mega Man, you get to play as Roll and the Robot Masters. Shockingly, if you actually defeat a Robot Master with the Mega Buster, they come to their senses and stop going crazy, and then you can play as them in these levels, and there are certain parts of these levels that actually require the Robot Master if you want to go through them. Obviously, it's nothing required to beat the game, but it's still a fun little addition, and I actually like this twist. I like playing as the Robot Masters, and I think this is really cool. And it certainly helps that these are some of the most iconic Robot Masters that the series ever saw. This remake also adds a fun little challenge mode that adds even more content. There was even a level editor in here. Like, yes, obviously the original game is always going to have its charm and its quirks, but yeah, this really seems to be the best way to play Mega Man 1, and that's why it sucks that Capcom won't re-release it. They keep re-releasing the original over and over and over, but this version, yeah, it hasn't happened yet, but hopefully it does one day. As things stand though, I think this is a pretty forgotten, underrated remake from the 2000s. Alright, so with a remake video, you knew I had to bring up the Yakuza Like a Dragon series at some point, but I think Kiwami 1 and 2 are pretty well known, especially at this point. You know what isn't as well known? Like a Dragon Ishin. Yeah, this one only came out a few years ago, and while it did get some buzz at release, I feel like I haven't heard anything on it in years. And that's a real shame, because this game is legit one of the best Like a Dragon games of them all. Not only does it seem to be a pretty faithful remake, but it's just a really good game in its own right. So this game is a remake of a Japanese exclusive Like a Dragon spin-off that was released for the PS3 in 2014. And while I obviously don't really have any experience with that original game since I can't read Japanese, I have played all the way through the remake and it's got a lot of really great stuff to it. It has a really interesting story and setting actually. It takes place in the late Edo period and it sees you playing as Sakamoto Ryoma as he tries to figure out who murdered his father. What makes this game so interesting is that it takes a bunch of historical figures and has them played, essentially portrayed by Yakuza characters. So obviously our main character Ryoma is Kiryu, but all of the Yakuza staples show up here. Majima, Ryuji Goda, Saejima, Akiyama, etc. And it's pretty great to see these characters playing these obviously very different roles, but it still feels like it's them to an extent. It still feels like it's just an extension of their personality. Like Majima's still kind of crazy and bloodthirsty, Kiryu is still very level-headed, etc. And I think the story, characters, and world building in general is just really well done in this game. The gameplay is also pretty awesome. It plays very similar to Yakuza 0 with multiple different styles, at least in combat, but these styles are actually pretty different from each other. Sometimes you'll have a sword, sometimes you'll have a gun, sometimes you even have a sword and a gun. I know, what a concept. But if you've ever played a Yakuza game before, you'll know how this general gameplay works. You get into a bunch of brawls with some fools, you beat their ass, you run around this little open area, you do karaoke, and you eat some really tasty looking food. Obviously it's set in a very different time period, a different world really, but it doesn't matter much. Everything still carries over pretty well, and I think this game has a great gameplay loop. It also has a ton of content. The game will take you well over 30 to 40 hours to beat, even if you don't do the side content. If you do the side content, oh, you're gonna be here for a long time. Thankfully, it's all pretty meaningful and it's actually enjoyable. If you're somebody who enjoys the Yakuza Like a Dragon games at all, this is a pretty easy sell. I mean, it's more of what you want, just in a completely different setting. It's got a big epic story, it's got some awesome moments to it. The gameplay is fun, it's memorable, it runs pretty well, and I'm just glad that we're able to finally play this game. I was curious about it for years, and yeah, I'm glad I got to finally experience it, and I feel like it is relatively underrated these days. So here we have one that I feel like has been underrated for ages, but over the last year or so I've actually been seeing a bunch of people talking about it, at least in the YouTube scene, and that is the remake of the Chronicles of Riddick Escape from Butcher Bay. Now, Escape from Butcher Bay has always been just a really underrated game in general. It's one of the best licensed games ever made, but what if I told you that this game actually did get a remake? Yeah, the second game, Assault on Dark Athena, included a remake of Escape from Butcher Bay. So when I see people say, oh, they should remake Escape from Butcher Bay, my brother in Christ, it's actually already been remade, and most of the time when people are showcasing Escape from Butcher Bay, they're actually showing the remake, not the original game. And that's because the remake is not only more accessible, but it does look quite a bit better than the original game. The original game had some really impressive lighting, and the remake, yeah, it's even more impressive. It still looks good even nowadays, and it has a solid art direction. It also plays and feels a lot smoother than that original game as well. If you're gonna play this game nowadays, you probably want to play the remake. Something that this remake absolutely captures from the original was this game's sense of aura, its atmosphere, the vibes. This game just has vibes like no other. Escaping from the prisons are pretty awesome, and Riddick is just a total badass in this game. Vin Diesel does an excellent job, and when it comes to this game's actual gameplay, oh, there's plenty of things to love here. The melee combat's pretty decent, the stealth is actually very well done, you feel like a total predator in the shadows, the gunplay's nice. The game has excellent pacing to it, it's always keeping things interesting, and it was just really entertaining throughout. There really isn't any filler here, and it's one of those games that I can recommend to pretty much everybody. Even if you don't know who Riddick is, you don't know what the movies are, doesn't matter. I think you're going to enjoy this one. And you get Assault on Dark Athena. The only thing is, this game isn't really widely accessible nowadays. Hopefully that changes one day. Either way though, it's an excellent remake of a great game. So for this entry, I've got a double header and a bit of a deep cut. I have Ys 1 and 2 Chronicles. Now, if you don't know the Ys series, it's one of the longest running action RPG franchises of all time and got started way back in the 80s actually, with these original 2 games for the Turbo Graphics of all systems. But both of these games were actually remade. They were re-released for the PC, DS, and PSP. But sadly, this is the latest release of Ys 1 and 2. It's not available on any modern consoles. But hey, hopefully that changes soon. It feels like they're really trying to bring all of the Ys games to modern consoles. I gotta say though, if you go into this game expecting it to play like Ys 3, Ys 4, Ys 8, 9, 10, etc., you're gonna be pretty surprised. This game does play very different from all of those other ones. It features bump combat, where yeah, you have to literally bump into enemies to attack them, but you can't just go head on, you have to go from angles in order to hurt them. If you go head on, you'll hurt them, but you'll also take damage. It's very interesting, and while I wouldn't say that it is aged all that well, it still is enjoyable for the most part. It takes a little bit of time to get used to. Yeah, it's a bit awkward, it's a bit clunky, but you can absolutely go through the game. I did. But then again, maybe I have more tolerance for bullshit than the average person. I did play Spyro Enter the Dragonfly after all. Both Ys 1 and 2 play pretty much identical to each other outside of some different levels and different abilities you get in the second game. It really feels like these were meant to be just one game, so them coming together for this remake absolutely feels right. Obviously, this remake looks a hell of a lot better than those original games, and I think it has a nice art style to it. Something I will praise to all hell though is the music. The music in Ys 1 and 2 goes crazy in these remakes. Like, it is so good. I could not believe how good it was, genuinely. It was some really good stuff. Something else that I enjoy about Ys 1 and 2, at least the remakes, is the game's pacing and the length. Yeah, these are old games, they're not that long, you can run through them pretty quick, the pacing is very brisk, it keeps things going pretty fast, and you'll beat it in a weekend. It's also rather challenging, especially towards the end of Ys 2. If you're somebody that enjoys action RPGs, or maybe you enjoy the later Ys games like Ys 8 or Ys 9, this might be worth checking out, especially if you've ever been curious about the earlier titles. It's not the best in the Ys series. It's honestly not even the best remake in the Ys series, but I feel like Ys 1 and 2 are way more underrated than the Ys 3 remake. The Ys 3 remake is really good also, I've played through that one, but I thought I would go for something different by talking about Ys 1 and 2. Either way, you can't really go wrong with Ys 1 through 3 remake wise. And so here's a remake that I feel like I never ever hear anything about, and that is Leisure Suit Larry in the Land of the Lounge Lizards Reloaded. This is a remake of the original Leisure Suit Larry, the point-and-click adventure game from the 80s. It was, at the time, considered maybe the most adult game ever made. Obviously, we laugh at this now. I mean, there's just straight gooner games all over Steam and the eShop. But back then, gaming was pretty tame. There was actually some class, and then there was Leisure Suit Larry, who absolutely has no class. So this is a very faithful remake of the original game, and it's easily the definitive way to play the original Leisure Suit Larry. It very much still is that old school point and click adventure, and it's actually a very faithful remake. They keep all of the jokes from the original, all of the toilet humor and sexual innuendo, and to my understanding, basically nothing has changed from the original. There's no censoring or modernization or anything like that. They really tried to make it as authentic as possible, which is something that I can really appreciate, especially nowadays. When it comes to the gameplay, it's also very authentic. You can play this game just like how you played the original, where you actually typed everything out, and it was at times cryptic as all hell. Or you can play it like, you know, a normal point and click adventure game where you just point, click, it's as simple as that. And honestly, that's how I play it. I'm really glad that this is a feature. I never liked the whole typing everything out in the original game. Like, I get it, that's how things were back then, but that doesn't mean it's intuitive nowadays. It is like the opposite of intuitive. Something that's also very intuitive now is the presentation. I love how this game looks. It has such a nice little art style to it. It's so charming, and it still has a whole lot of personality. And Larry still looks as sleazy as you'd imagine. He looks even sleazier. Like, don't get it twisted, this still very much is an M-rated game. It covers some pretty mature topics, and while there isn't any outright gooner shit on here, you still want to keep it away from the kiddies. I would say that this is one of the better point and click games from the 80s and 90s. It's still playable nowadays, and even though it's only a few hours long with a walkthrough, it's still funny and pretty entertaining. For some reason it was taken off Steam, but I'm pretty sure you can get it on GOG.com. This is the best way to play the OG. And so here we have the Mario vs. Donkey Kong remake from last year, and you might be, really? You're considering this an underrated remake, a Mario game? Yeah, I'm considering it underrated. Relative to most remakes, I'd say this one was pretty under the radar. There wasn't a ton of buzz about it pre-release, and I haven't seen a whole lot post-release either, and that's a shame because this is easily the best way to play Mario vs. Donkey Kong going forward, and it's arguably the best game in the entire series, if that really means anything. Now, you gotta remember, the original game was over 20 years old, and it was a Game Boy Advance title, so obviously things were pretty limited then. This remake really does take that original game's soul, though, and just makes it a lot more modern. This is obviously a very different type of Mario game. Yeah, Mario has a pretty diverse moveset, but it's a very slow puzzle platformer that not everybody is going to enjoy, but I've always enjoyed the original Mario vs. Donkey Kong. Mario feels really tight. I love how you have to utilize his moveset, and these levels actually can start to get pretty tricky, especially towards the end of the game. You really actually have to think and sometimes even plan, which is not the most common for really any Mario platformer, but that's absolutely the case here. When it comes to the general presentation, obviously it's a hell of a lot better than what the Game Boy Advance had. I think the game has a really nice art style to it, and the music actually goes really hard. Like, the music is genuinely really good. The game controls a lot better, it feels actually pretty nice, and then there's a bunch of extra levels thrown in here that weren't in the original. The original game can be completed in just a few hours, but if you want to 100% it, you'll probably double your game length, but with these new levels, it'll take you probably over 8 or 9 hours if you really want to see everything in this game, which is nice. Yeah, the point system was removed from the original, but like, genuinely, does that really mean anything at all? Like, whatsoever? Was anything of value lost? I don't really think so. Either way, if you haven't checked this one out and you're looking for a different type of Mario game, it might be the game for you. Well, Leisure Suit Larry wasn't the only point-and-click adventure game. We also have The Secret of Monkey Island Special Edition, along with Monkey Island 2 Special Edition. Yep, we got a double header here. But you know what? These are some fantastic remakes of two beloved classics. I love both of the original Monkey Island games. They're funny, they're witty, they're memorable, there's a lot of great dialogue, and the puzzles aren't so cryptic that they're impossible. Okay, yeah, they're pretty difficult. Alright, outside of the puzzles, I really love just about everything when it comes to the original Monkey Island and its sequel, and these remakes are easily the best way to play these games going forward. Like, they are beautiful remakes. You gotta remember, the original games looked very, very crusty. They're over 30 years old at this point. I would expect them to look pretty crusty, and so seeing these remakes, oh yeah, these are just incredible recreations. And what's really cool is you can actually switch between the original graphics and the more modern graphics on the fly, a la Halo Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary, and you know what? I think it looks pretty darn incredible. Something else that has been significantly improved from the original games is just the actual gameplay itself. The user interface is so much better. The original, I mean, it's the original. They hadn't exactly figured out how to make the most intuitive user interface. I mean, it was fine for the time, but coming back to it nowadays, yeah, it can be pretty rough. These remakes, though, just totally rework it, and it makes a lot more sense. It's actually pretty smooth, and it overall just makes it a lot more playable. It's a lot easier to come back to these games thanks to the updated interface and overall tweaks to the gameplay. I believe these remakes also add some kind of a hint system, but I'll be real, the puzzles are so cryptic, illogical, nonsensical, and all over the place in both of these games most of the time that, man, it doesn't matter how many hints they give me, I'm probably not going to be able to figure it out. At least not in a reasonable amount of time. But even with that in mind, I totally recommend playing both of these games. Like, they're absolute classics for a reason. They're some of the funniest games from this era. The writing actually still really does hold up all these years later. They tell very interesting stories. Guybrush Threepwood is a very likable protagonist, even if he is an asshole. And you're just really going to want to see what happens to him in these stories in general. There was a Monkey Island game released a few years ago, and all it really acknowledges is the original two games. Yeah, I guess it does have some minor references to the others, but it mostly just acknowledges Monkey Island 1 and 2, and you know what? You can play those just fine with these remakes. And so here we have a remake that is very near and dear to my heart with SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated. Now, Battle for Bikini Bottom, it's one of my favorite games of all time. I played it all the time as a kid, and I love it even nowadays. And so when I saw that they were remaking it, oh man, I popped off. I was like, no way. Out of every game that could get a remake, they're actually remaking the one that I grew up with. And you know what? This is a pretty darn good remake that didn't get a whole lot of attention, just like the original game. A lot of people still wrote it off as just a licensed 3D platformer and nothing more, but I've always thought that this game is pretty good. It is a very faithful remake to the original game. It plays pretty much identical to the original. It feels like the original. They even tried to make all of the glitches the same as the original for the speedrunning community. Graphically, the game looks a lot better than what the original game had. It looks a lot more in line with current, really regular SpongeBob. The original game had such a weird art style and some really odd lighting. This just looks a lot better, and the music is pretty much identical to the original as well. They even added a multiplayer mode here, which isn't very good, but you know what? I appreciate the effort, and they actually brought in the robot Squidward that was cut from the original game. The game is pretty much the same as the original, so if you enjoyed it, you're gonna enjoy it once again. It's not the most advanced or revolutionary or innovative 3D platformer, but it's a pretty good 3D platformer that has a good SpongeBob coat of paint with a lot of fan service. And what's really great to see is that this game really started like a SpongeBob game revolution. After this, we would actually get the Cosmic Shake, and now we're getting a new SpongeBob 3D platformer, and it's like, wow, they remade the classic, and then we got some new ones. This is legit better than I could have ever expected, and I got this remake to thank for it. It's an awesome remake that I have no problem recommending to everybody. And so here we have a remake that I feel like still doesn't get enough love, and that is Nier Replicant that came out a few years ago. Now, the original Nier, there were plenty of things that I liked about it, but for the most part, I didn't really enjoy the game very much. So when I saw that they were remaking it, I was pretty excited because this was their opportunity to really fix things, and I think for the most part it absolutely does. The gameplay is significantly better than the original game. It plays much more like Automatopoeia, and the combat is just significantly better. The combat was just downright terrible in the original, and it's so much better in Replicant. The other gameplay styles that show up have also been improved. It's just a smoother, better experience overall. The game obviously looks a lot better than the original. The original game actually looked pretty decent. This looks significantly better, and it actually runs a hell of a lot better than the original as well. I remember the original sometimes had some frame rate issues. As for the music though, it's pretty much untouched. I mean, the original music in Nier was pretty goated. It's absolutely goated here in Nier Replicant as well. So for the most part, this really is the definitive way to play Nier going forward. It's cheaper, it's more accessible, it's more playable, it's just a better game overall. However, there is one difference between Replicant and the original North American release, and that's the main character and their connection to the girl. In the original North American release, it was a dad and his daughter. Here, it's a brother and their sister. And while I don't think this connection is bad, or the story is bad, or the characters are bad, or anything like that, I actually prefer the connection between the father and the daughter. I just resonated with this more. I'm not entirely sure why, it just felt really real with the brother and the sister. I don't know, it felt alright, but it just didn't hit the same. Either way though, I'd still rather play this game any day of the week. I mean, the gameplay is just so much better. The combat actually feels nice. It's actually rewarding. There's some good elements to it. The side quests are improved. The pacing is better. It feels a lot better. It's not even close. I'd rather play the new one. But the story, I kind of do prefer the original. Not a deal breaker though. Either way, I think this is a great remake that really deserved a lot more love. So here we have another remake that I've spoken on a few times with Pac-Man World Repack. This is a remake of the original Pac-Man world. I remember still being pretty surprised that this game was actually getting a remake. It's not the most well-known or beloved 3D platformer from the 90s, but I think it's one of the more underrated, and naturally it's one of the more underrated remakes as well. And it's easily the definitive way to play Pac-Man World going forward. This game really is just a straight improvement on what the original game had. It looks a lot better. It's not crusty like the original. That original had some PS1 grain, and there's just a lot of quality of life improvements. For instance, the original game had you moving with the D-pad in mind. Pac-Man was kinda limited when it came to his movement, at least directionally, and that's just not something you have to even worry about. Here, Pac-Man controls just fine, and it feels like the game was made for this all along. The difficulty has been tweaked, and you can actually make the game significantly easier if you want to. I think the game was already pretty easy, but you know what? It's nice that they're adding those accessibility options. There's a few extra bonuses here and there. I like the new remastered music, and the game really just captures the essence of that original game. It's just a lighthearted, fun 3D platformer that stars our favorite pizza-shaped fella. And I think this remake really brings that to the forefront, and if you're gonna ever play the original Pac-Man world, yeah, it's not even close. What makes this even cooler is that Pac-Man World 2 is also getting remade in this style as well. I always thought Pac-Man World 2 was way better than the original, and I thought that game was underrated then. I'm sure the remake for Pac-Man World 2 is going to be underrated as well. Either way, I think it's pretty cool that Pac-Man World of all games, really series, have come back, and I hope maybe in the future we actually get a new Pac-Man World one day. I mean, one can hope, right? So here I got another double header with Destroy All Humans 1 and 2. Now you probably have heard of these, you probably remember them from back in the day, or maybe you played these remakes, but I'd still say that they're pretty underrated. When I think of like cult classic games from the 2000s, Destroy All Humans usually shows up pretty quickly. They didn't sell like crazy, they didn't review all that well, but people remember them and they love them, and that's why I was pretty excited that both of them got remakes. And these are actually very faithful remakes for the most part. They really just aim to capture what made those original games great and just bring it to the modern era. They don't reinvent the wheel, they don't even change the games up that much. They just tweak the controls, update the graphics, and that's pretty much it. Both of these games are semi-open world, seeing you go around as Crypto, just kind of causing chaos. Sometimes you have to hide as a human, and sometimes the game lets you get in your ship and just cause a ton of chaos. Either way, it's all a whole lot of fun. The games just have this really weird, quirky, odd atmosphere and tone to them that I feel like no other games really have, and it allows them to stand out even nowadays. They go for like that old school Alien vibe, those old school sci-fi vibes where shit was in black and white, and it's corny, it's cheesy, it's ridiculous, but it absolutely knows it as well. These games are funny, the writing is funny, and there's plenty of ridiculous moments, especially in the second one. The actual gameplay is aged incredibly well, the controls have really been touched up from the original, and they're still a ton of fun to play. Yeah, they're not the most involved, at times they can actually be pretty mindless even, but that doesn't mean that they aren't enjoyable. These games are still wildly entertaining, and I absolutely recommend them to anybody. Like, these games were fun when I was younger on the PS2, and they're still fun even nowadays. And so here we have what I believe to be a pretty underrated remake, and that is No More Heroes Heroes Paradise. I'm sure some people would say this isn't a remake, but I mean, I'm pretty sure it is, and I'm pretty sure that it's about as forgotten as it gets these days. So what exactly is this a remake of? It is a remake of the original No More Heroes. You gotta remember, No More Heroes originally released exclusively for the Wii, and this remake released for the PS3, exclusively in the States actually. And it aims to improve a number of different things from the original game. Since then, the original No More Heroes has been re-released on pretty much every console, but this remake has never been re-released whatsoever, and at this point, I don't think it's going to ever get re-released. So it's pretty much locked to the PS3, and while I can't immediately say that this is the definitive way to play No More Heroes 1, it certainly is a really great way to play it, and it actually is pretty different from the original. The game has a completely different art style from the original, and I actually really enjoy how this remake looks. It has a nice aesthetic to it. Yeah, it is different from all of the other games, but there's just something about this that I like. almost all of the music comes back from the original. Not all of it does, but there is a few original tracks here that are also pretty good as well. Look, the music of No More Heroes, it doesn't really matter which version you're playing, it's always going to be good. When it comes to the gameplay, it plays pretty similar to the original game. It's a pretty faithful remake that is still about Travis trying to become the #1 assassin. You still slice the shit out of everybody with the beam katana, it's as gory as ever, you still gotta get money, you still explore the lifeless dead open world. There's still some really, I'll just say, interesting mini games that show up here, and you do all of this without the motion controls, which was new for the time. I mean, yes, you could play it with the PlayStation Move, but I'm pretty sure most people just played with the DualShock. And it actually controls pretty well. I think it arguably controls better than even the Wii version. It feels nice, it plays nice, and it's still as entertaining as always. The story is excellent, Travis is great, the game is hilarious, the writing is all over the place. If you haven't played No More Heroes, it is a great game. This PS3 version, the remake though, it actually does have a few extras. It has a few boss fights from No More Heroes 2 who show up as like dream fights, and I think that's pretty cool. There's also plenty of differences here and there, and you'd need an entire like checklist to really see all of them. Either way, it's a great remake that never really got much attention when it released, let alone now, like 15 years later, and it really is a great version of a great game. And so here we have a game that I haven't talked about in a very long time. I don't even think I've ever talked about it in a list video, and that is Wonder Boy the Dragon's Trap. This is a remake of the third Wonder Boy game that came out in the late 80s. This remake came out in 2017. It was actually developed by Lizard Cube, who are going on to make the Shinobi game. And I gotta say, not only is this a pretty good game, but it's a very faithful remake as well. It's easily the definitive way to play this game going forward, and what's really cool is you can actually switch between the original and the remake on the fly at the press of a button. And it's really great to see just how far we've really come with graphics. The original game, I mean, it was a Master System game. Obviously, it's gonna look pretty basic. This new remake, I love the art style. I love how this game looks. It has so much color and life and charm to it. It really just has a nice aesthetic, and it's really appealing to the eye. The game plays pretty much identical to the original outside of some improved controls. It's no longer as stiff as it was. It actually feels very smooth for the most part. You might be wondering, what even type of game is this? Is this like a Metroidvania? Not really. I mean, it has Metroidvania elements, but this was before Metroidvanias. It really is just a 2D platformer with a little bit of backtracking, and it stars you playing as Wonder Boy, who can transform into a few different creatures to solve some puzzles and get past some platforming challenges. While this was original in the original game, this new version actually adds a number of extra things, like the ability to play as Wonder Girl. Equipment and really the menus and the user interface have just been streamlined for the better. It's a lot more intuitive, weapon toggling is instant, and it really is just a much smoother experience than what the original game was. And the original game, you know, it was fine and all, but this remake, it really is the way to go. This is a super underrated game that barely got any attention when it came out, and I've like never hear anybody talking about it nowadays, and that's a real shame. I think this is actually a pretty good 2D platformer, and it's genuinely one of the best 2D remakes I've ever seen. Yeah, there's not a lot of them, but this is one of the best. And then to finish things off, the last underrated remake we're talking about today, it's gotta be the System Shock remake. This one came out a few years ago, initially only for PC, but eventually for consoles, and I feel like with both releases, it just didn't get a ton of attention. And that sucks, because not only is this a great remake, but it really brings this classic into the modern era, and I mean that in the best of ways. I could never, genuinely never go back to the original System Shock after this remake was made. It's just so much better. Like, the original System Shock was good and all, especially for the time, but it has not aged all that well. This remake seeks to improve that. It brings it into the modern era, it has a ton of quality of life improvements, it looks a hell of a lot better, it controls better, it's more intuitive, it's smoother, it's streamlined in the right ways, but it also doesn't sacrifice what made the original System Shock as great as it is. It still is an immersive sim, there still is plenty of ways to go about things, you're still dropped into these floors where you're pretty much just exploring to your heart's content, there's tons of enemies, and it's still got a kick-ass vibe and aesthetic all these years later. This game's got a pretty ominous vibe to it, and it's always been a bit unsettling. It was in the original, and they totally nailed that in the remake. It also, you know, looks pretty nice. I think this is a good looking game, especially considering that it's not some big AAA game. This is like an indie game, and yeah, I think it's impressive. The story is still really intriguing and engaging throughout out. It has a very good mystery throughout the entire experience that I very much wanted to see. Something that I really like that this remake adds is they just make it a bit more clear what you're supposed to do. In the original game, man, I was so freaking lost it wasn't even funny. You still get lost here, that absolutely happens, but they made it just a little more obvious where you're supposed to go and what exactly your objective is. I really can appreciate that. The weapons and really just combat in general feels a lot better in this game. Also, it's a lot smoother. The inventory is a lot better. Yeah, I've already said it. This is the best way to play the game, not even close. Not enough people talked about this one. That's a shame. I'd say not enough people talked about any of these games if we're being honest. I also realize now I basically talked about 20 remakes instead of 15 since there was a bunch of doubles in here. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you made it to this part of the video, you can comment our secret code word, which is not going to be spicy nug, it's going to be crispy chicken. Oh yeah, I'm gonna go get the crispy chicken from Wendy's. That's what I'm gonna get, not spicy nug. So with that, I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe, y'all.